and so it didn't really matter. So, hello and welcome to episode 161 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is September 9th, 2019. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both from McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode will be McFlugel.com/161, where you'll be able to find things we talk about, our sponsor, LibertyMugs.com, where you can buy awesome libertarian-themed mugs and stickers and shirts, as well as a way to find our guest. So, Slappy, would you like to introduce our guest for this episode?
Yeah, man. Our guest today is our friend Shop. He can be found on Twitter at Scoparchist. Now, we were just talking before we went on. Shop is spelled S-C-O-P, and the Twitter handle is at S-C-O-P, Archist, A-R-C-H-I-S-T. And we're here to talk about the fine arts today, something I know, I'd say, less than nothing about. So this should be a good conversation because I'll learn a little bit, and Shop has some things he'd like to say. So welcome to the Rollo and Slappy Show.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I'm just going to tell the audience, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just a lover of the fine arts. There might be some people out there that get really triggered about stuff I say, but you're just going to have to deal with it.
Well, I've been unfiltering myself a lot between Twitter and this podcast. So
no, I have no filter. I'm just
by all means, go for it.
Let it go. And so one thing you said before we went on too is it's kind of the fine arts has this reputation, shall we say, by people like me who know nothing about it as being like hoity-toity or high society, and you say that's not the case. So I figured that might be a good spot to start. Or tell us what shop means. S-C-O-P.
Yeah. So shop. I'll start with that. Shop is just it's a poet. So some of you may know it's an Anglo-Saxon society-based kind of thing. So in those times, we're talking the Beowulf times, so we're pre-England. England was formed at the Battle of Hastings, and I can't remember the exact. It's 1066. I do remember the exact date. So England was formed in 1066. So this is pre-England, and the Anglo-Saxons were mainly a Viking people. So when you're thinking Anglo-Saxons, you're thinking Scandinavian peninsula, that kind of thing. And with that, they had small villages, and within those villages they had shops. Shops were kind of poets as we know them today, but not necessarily. They're more storytellers. For example, if you're familiar with Homer, the Greek poet, that's more of what a shop is. It's a oral tradition of stories passed down. And I feel like from all the stuff I've heard, it's a very they're experts in their field at telling stories and keeping things captivated because, winters around there was nothing really much to do except drink and eat and then tell stories. So, I just want to try to carry on that tradition. It's dying today. It really is. That's basically what a shop is. Nice. So, I forgot what I was going to go after that.
Well, I don't know if you were going to go in here, but if you talk about, why we should appreciate some of the arts, poetry, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, first off, before we even get there, why I should appreciate, what is it? What do you consider the fine arts? Because to me, I don't know. I would guess, maybe Mozart, Michelangelo.
For me, it's like tractors and fruitcake.
Yeah, like John Deere.
It's true. It is true. So, to me, the arts it's a very, very broad definition. To me, an art is anything that is not imminent and necessary to society, but adds layers and enjoyment to it. But it also has to take skill to do. Not everyone can be an artist. For example, I say, for me, I know it might sound kind of trashy and telling of where I'm from, but I consider WWE an art. The acting and of the wrestling and everything, and the passion that goes into it. Not everyone can do that. It does take skill. It doesn't, add a necessary pillar to society.
But it's still real to me, damn it.
Hey, I never said it wasn't real. I just said that it's not necessary. It's not like it's not food. You don't need it to eat. You don't need it to survive, but it does add an element of entertainment to society. So with that definition, you can encompass a lot of things: cooking, acting, writing, sculpting, painting, anything you traditionally would think of art, but also it allows for new fields to really perfect their form of whatever they do. Uh, and with me, I'm a writer, so that's really how I got into this whole fine arts world. So I just started, shitting around writing one day, and then I just started sharing it with my friends and my teachers and all of that, and they really liked it. So I went and started researching more and reading more of other prolific writers, and it's a rabbit hole. It really is. You just kind of fall down it.
What do you like to write?
WWE.
What do you like to write?
I started with poetry, and what I mean by poetry is not that bullshit pansy stuff where it's free verse or slam poetry. All right,
limericks.
Before
What's with a man from Peru?
Before we go into this, I'm just gonna say, slam poetry is a disgrace. It takes no talent. All they're doing is just writing sentences and saying it with different inflections. Mm-hmm. So slam poetry, there's a lot of as there is in the cryptid community and conspiracy community, there's a lot of misinformation, I guess you could say, out there, where just people don't know what the fuck they're doing. They don't know anything about their craft, but yet they proclaim themselves as the best. Which I have no problem with if you are actually good. If you're good at what you do, I want you to be shouting from the rooftops, hey, look at my art. It's the best. But slam poetry is terrible. But so when I say I was a poet, I'd be writing mainly structured poems, so sonnets, odes.
A sonnet that's like Shakespeare?
Yeah, so it's sonnet. It's very specific.
Okay.
It's 14 lines, and it's all in Shakespearean sonnets. So there are 3 different schools of sonnets and Shakespearean sonnets. All of them are iambic pentameter. The rhyme scheme is A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, and then there's a couplet at the end that rhymes G G. It's very, very structured, and to me, the structure of the poems. I'll go into this real quick. Structured poems, I think, is a very, very difficult art form because you're taking something that is already difficult, the English language or whatever language you write in, and you're trying to convey a very complex and difficult abstract idea into very, very confined terms. So you're really, when you read a sonnet, or when I read a sonnet, I really appreciate it because it is an artist challenging him or herself into, like try to define love in those parameters. It's very difficult to do. Even if you don't successfully define what you're going out to do, but you write a decent sonnet or a decent ode, it's an accomplishment in itself.
I can really appreciate that, because whether it's poetry or lyrics and music, when they're getting, because it's this, especially with music, I mean, you have to follow that structure too, and it's also has a certain rhyming structure, and yeah, it's I'm a musician, I play music, and I like coming up with stuff, but I am not a lyricist, and so to be able to get that into and be so consistent with that rhyming and the rhythm of it, it's something that I think is underappreciated with that skill. So.
And this stuff doesn't happen overnight either. Like, are you familiar with the Fairy Queen? It's an epic rotation written by Edmund Spenser.
I'm not familiar.
No.
It's a very, very, very old book. But I mean, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. This takes years and years of writing just to finish, one of their chapters. It's not.
I mean, as me not being a writer, especially that kind of writer, I don't even know how I do it. I wouldn't even know how to get an idea and then fit that idea into a structure that is pretty rigid. Yeah.
It blows my mind still, like especially when you have like I'm in college right now, so I've been lucky enough with one of my professors, and he's a medieval English. He has a doctorate in medieval English, and he is just so passionate about what he talks about that it adds like double, if not triple, the layers of what you're already getting out of it into it. Like if you ever want to get into like poetry per se, Edmund Spenser is one of the kings, and I'm sure if you're not into the fine arts, you haven't heard of him.
I'm not
But
familiar with them. No.
he's actually buried in right next to Shakespeare in I can't remember what that place is called, where all the royalty of England is buried.
I'm not sure.
Westminster Abbey, I think.
Oh, okay.
Something like that. But his stuff is just, it's like you think you understand it, and then you have someone that studied his work for 10 years tell you that you missed it completely, and here's 3 other meanings behind it. It just blows your mind.
Yeah, so how long ago was he around? What was his time period?
I think he was the 1300s.
Okay.
So pretty old dude.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not someone you could talk to, obviously, but
No.
but yeah, those are the fine arts. Like that is the pinnacle of art, in my opinion. And with art, it's obviously all subjective and mostly opinion, but when it comes to that, I do see there is a steep learning curve. I'm just trying to get into the learning curve, and the gate into arts, which shouldn't be a gate, it just should be just open borders, everyone running in. But I can see in a way the gate there, the learning curve there, because it does take years of understanding to really get into this guy's work or this girl's work, really.
So, yeah, like say I picked up The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, and I read through it. Is it something, what should I be doing? Should I also ask Rollo to read it and then we talk about it, or read someone who has written about Edward's? Like, how would you, when you say how deep it is and how all these meanings come out of it, how do you go about finding that or thinking about that, or is it all subjective and it's nice to get different perspectives?
That's the thing, is that with especially in literature, what I would recommend, my favorite thing is the Socratic Seminar. That's pounded into people in public schools, and it loses all its meaning, even though it's one of the most effective learning tools from peer to peer. What I mean by that is you go through, you read it, you can take notes if you want, you don't have to take notes, but you try to understand it from your experiences, from your perspective. Then you go through like kind of like a round table. That's what Socratic Seminar is. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
Sure.
It's like a round table, and you go through and you share your opinions and your perspectives on the piece of art that you see. And then after all that's done, you may have a complete understanding, you may not. So it's also, I recommend, if go to your local expert on the person. It may be you don't have a local expert, but I'm sure there's someone around that has more of an expertise than I would or you would, and ask him or her what they think, what the actual history behind this is. How did this person, live their life? What was the place they grew up in like? Because that actually does have a lot of effect on art in general, is someone's environment. It really comes out on paper, it comes out in paint.
You mentioned food as being an art, and it comes out in food, and I don't know if you listened to Tasting Anarchy, that podcast, but
yeah,
I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, that the terroir, yeah, that's the term I learned from their show, is that part of the wine, the story of the wine, the taste of the wine, the whole feel of the wine, everything behind it comes from the land and the weather and everything there, and it's amazing how I don't mean to not change the subject, but
you're good.
cut in. But you're talking about poetry and everything, and that's not in my wheelhouse at all. But I mentioned before about being a musician, but it's perfectly parallel to how I am as a musician. To like, I can understand exactly what you're saying, not about poetry, but I can apply it directly to music. And yeah, it's amazing how well that fits together.
That's the thing with art, is that it's a very broad, like, as the definition I gave, it's a very broad field as well, and most of the understanding can translate very well into other subjects of art.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know anything about painting or sculpting, but I can get a pretty good understanding from talking to someone that is, and I know the points to talk about already, to see, about the artist, what they went through, how does this translate into their painting or sculpture, and that kind of thing. Art is a very easy language to learn. I just don't feel that most people have been taught how to enjoy art, how to speak the language of art. And it's like music translates directly into poetry, and poetry translates directly into painting, and so on and so forth.
Yes. So do you think or say if you talk to, like you said, you don't know much about painting or sculpting, if you talk to a painter or someone who knows a lot about painting or sculptures, do you think that conversation reinforces your understanding of poetry? Like, can you glean a lot of stuff from them to not only learn a little bit about their craft, but also help you appreciate or understand your craft better?
Oh, of course. Especially when it comes to, I feel like painting and that form of art and writing and literature, they're very close cousins in that field. Just because the ideas of both, they're trying to accomplish almost the same goal, which is conveying abstract conveying abstract ideas through very, very concrete mediums.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go back to, if you're writing a poem on love, you have tools to do so, and those are your like your rhetoric, I can't remember that, your tropes and schemes and all that kind of, your craft, the stuff that you've been taught that can be taught. Is like, your metaphors, your similes, alliterations, that kind of thing. So you have tools in the same way that a painter has his or her tools, mm-hmm. which, the brushes and that kind of thing, to convey something that there is not really a definition for. Like, yeah, we can define love in words, but that definition does not suffice for someone that cannot feel it and wants to know what it feels like.
Yeah, that's probably why love songs are so popular, and they do that's a great way of thinking about it.
That's another thing. I know in the ANCAP and libertarian fields on social media, just mainly Twitter, there's a lot of nihilism, and I really, really despise nihilism. Just because it's very detrimental to the human psyche, human nature. And I believe, as many people before me have, is that art is the solution to that nihilism. Is that it gives, the human nature, human psyche, reasons to push on for achievement. There's no point in living, trying to build the best bridge if that bridge goes to nowhere. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look at some of the stuff that has stood the test of time. We mentioned Shakespeare already, but and Homer too, and Michelangelo's art, and Da Vinci, and we can name all these artists and these sculptures and music. Mozart has stuff that we're never going to not listen to, mm-hmm. And even architecture. There's some architecture that has stood the test of time too, and you look at today and it's like, oh well, this house is going to fall down in 40 years or something, just to throw out a random number. So why do you think, and here's kind of the crux of maybe where our episode turns maybe to our libertarian bend a little bit more, but why is it that we don't have that today. Like, we don't have buildings that, if they build a building today, I don't think anyone expects it to last for 400 years. We look at, you were talking about slam poetry, how it's just like garbage, and I know a lot of modern art, like painting, is just kind of like, you look at it and you're like, it's
Remember
just kind of like
Cy Twombly?
Cy Twombly? No.
Yeah, you remember that? We were looking at that. It's in the Philly Art Museum.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just someone like I saw. It's burned me because I one of the books the Bitcoin Standard, he talks about art actually a little bit and its relationship to sound and easy money. And I saw this commercial the other day, and it was just this part of it. I don't know what the commercial was for, but it showed this old guy with boxing gloves on, with
I saw that.
paint on them, and he's just like punching the canvas, and it's like, that's just random. But we're told that like that's art, and this is supposed to be beautiful, and we're supposed to really appreciate it. And I'm not saying that you can't appreciate it, but like, compared to looking at that versus the Sistine Chapel,
Yeah,
like
there's a big difference.
Yeah, so do you want to
I'd say.
go into what you think the reasons are that we've gone from art that would take, someone's entire lifetime, bringing up that skill, versus something that it looks like, I don't know if that was my 3-year-old nephew put together or some famous modern artist?
It's a difficult question. What I think it boils down to is honestly just the literacy of the viewers. There's a lack of art literacy among society. Is that it's very difficult to differentiate between true artist and skill and mastery of the craft versus someone that just walked into it yesterday and supposedly has a knack for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been up to the viewer to really decipher, is this good, is this not good? And it comes down to a societal standard, like, artists aren't just good from one person. They might, like, I respect someone that paints a picture and only one person loves that picture, and that one person supports the artist keeps painting, develop his craft. But when that painting is garbage, and the only reason that the person is financing them is just for, like, I don't know, tax relief or something like that, it really, what I think it boils down to is that the market has become oversaturated with quote unquote art. I mean, and I think it really began with writing and novels. Personally, I can't. This is gonna make a lot of people mad. I can't stand Harry Potter, and the reason is not because Harry Potter is a bad story. It's that you can't. You can't really do what's going on in the Harry Potter thing, this franchise. It's like, it's become franchise. It's what it is that it's not there for the art. It's just a story to read that anyone could tell you on the street, making up on the fly. And if you read it, it's not that great of writing compared to, Shakespeare or Spencer or any other great English writers. It's just kind of like juvenile level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really. It's stuff like Harry Potter and people like J.K. Rowling have really dirtied the water for the art field. And yes, they may be good stories, like I was saying, they may be relatable characters, but it's not good writing. If you look at it objectively, the characters do not follow their own characterization. The plots are very linear. There's no real, true plot turns. You can tell what's going to happen from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no deeper meaning. There's no. That's the biggest thing with art, is that there has to be a message. There has to be something that the artist is trying to convey. And that's why a lot of people my age always get mad at, like, that's where the divide comes back in, is that people my age, and I don't know, maybe people your age, are frustrated with these art snobs and these, literature snobs that are telling uh, the masses that this is what this means, but they're not giving a chance for the reader to come to that understanding. Or the viewer, or whatever art you can tell I'm focusing mainly on literature because that's what I know best.
Sure.
Uh,
Well, it's funny. It's like, because I feel the same way about pop music.
mhm.
It's like there's nothing there, and it's like, all right, I got it. It's catchy, but like,
Because that's what sells.
Right.
That's what sells. And that comes down to, there is good stuff that sells, like Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash. It really has a meaning and a message it's trying to convey. But it's a very, very small group, a very small minority.
Sure. I mean, one thing I can appreciate with the literature thing, and I got actually a couple points about this, but I remember, like, now as I'm older, I'm a much more avid reader than I was younger. But I remember, in high school and grade school, reading some of these novels that they would have you read, if you want to call them novels, stories. And it's like, maybe it was entertaining. But I mean, like, once I read in college, I read Silas Marner by George Eliot. And that was like, wow, I love this book. It like had a much deeper impact on me than just like, oh yeah, that was a good story. It was like, wow, the story was good, and I also learned a whole lot from this.
Mhm.
So I can appreciate what you're talking about. And then on the flip side, speaking of trashy books, 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
My buddy one time, his girlfriend was reading it, and I was over his house or something, and then he goes, here, just open up to a random page, read the page, and tell me what you think. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, this is garbage. Like, not that I just don't like the story, but like the writing was awful, like unbelievably awful. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, tell me,
And this
when
is
when
like
you're
the
a
most
writer,
popular book in the world.
when you're a prolific writer or someone that at least enjoys the craft, that becomes 10 times worse.
I'm sure. Yeah, it's crazy. So I think you should actually. I mentioned it before, but if you haven't read it, I recommend reading the Bitcoin Standard, because he talks about art and talks about its relationship to sound money, and how he was kind of saying how it's like back in the day, when there was a sound money, when people did have a lot of wealth, and they had an appreciation for the craft, that they would commission guys, and since the time preference was very low, they had a lot of patience. They didn't need this kind of instant gratification. They were willing to wait, sometimes years, for stuff to get completed.
Oh, yeah.
And so they would commission this stuff. Now we live in this very fast-paced society of instant gratification, that we want it now, and we're not willing to wait for anything. We're not even willing to save. So it's just like this. Well, I'll since I understand music a little better, I'll put it this way. I mean, you can just get a computer you can program a computer to play whatever notes you want it to. And then even the vocalist, you don't even need the vocalist to really be that good. You can just reprogram what they were singing with autotune. Not that autotune's a bad or evil thing. In certain contexts, in certain places, it could be good. But when that's what you're using to make music, like, where's the real art to it? It's not a craft anymore as much. It's just that expression, the ability for like, as a musician and listening to music, I can really appreciate the various. I'm a bassist. I play the bass, and I can pick out certain styles of certain players and really appreciate kind of what they add to the music, what they add to the band, and why the band wouldn't be the same if they substitute another musician in there. And so when you don't have someone really honing in on the craft, spending all those years and years and years of getting better to the point where they can be like, all right, this is my masterpiece, and here it is for you. You just lose so much, and yeah, that expression of those feelings and thoughts that you're trying to get out, you can't do that with just typing literally software up and saying, all right, well, it's just going to play these notes, and it's going to be the same thing every single time. That's like why the what's that Christmas, this Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Yeah,
it's like I can appreciate what they're doing with that, but it's like you could just substitute whoever you want in there, and it doesn't make a difference. It's just kind of, I don't want to rip on them too much because they're excellent, but it's like it's missing that kind of that feel, that soul to it.
The timeless nature.
Yeah, the individuality of it, of what the musician's adding to it. And I guess you can make that criticism of any, a lot of classical music.
Yeah,
with the orchestra, but there's really stuff. The music, man, I'm kind of rambling here. Sorry. But I guess it's trying to get what you're trying to appreciate, whether it's what the guy wrote in the music and what it can be expressed through that, which is good. So it's really just a personal thing, personal beef with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I don't want to knock all that art because they are playing legit stuff.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about with the timeless nature and the time it takes in to make a masterpiece. Like Beethoven, he only made 9 symphonies, and he was old. He wasn't young when he died. He wasn't like 20 years old. It's just not stuff that you can walk into and write something, call it a good day's work, and then publish it the next day. And like the Fairy Queen. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything so complex because it has 6 layers of allegory. At any point in that story, it could mean one of 6 things. That's not something you can do overnight. It's not something that a Joe Schmo on the side of the road can do.
No, not at all. So, do you have any thoughts on because I know we always hear from, and it's ironic because we're kind of talking about how, not that I don't know what your opinion is on whether the arts are dying right now, but they're not what they used to be. But we hear all the time, we see it on TV, we hear about the schools are always trying to, we got to protect the arts, save the arts. So here's the irony of it is that the government's spending all this time and resources on saving the arts, but why aren't we getting a better product? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Because they are monetizing it. I do think that is one of the big things. So I don't think art can die. I think it is in a decline, but art is one of those things that is, it's mutually inclusive with humanity. As long as there is humanity left in humans, there will always be art. But it is in a serious decline right now. I think that is because the crony monetization of art in general. Artists were never rich people. They were often beggars on the sides of streets. The only reason there was ever quote-unquote prominent writers is because like royalty or something picked them up off the street and said, hey, here's a place to live. Here's a stipend to keep you going. All I want you to do is write.
Mm-hmm.
And like Tennessee Williams, he's one of my favorite dramatists or playwrights, whatever you want to call him. And writing his beginning plays, he was in a shoe factory with one of his relatives all day, and then he didn't sleep at night so that he could write. There's a dedication to craft and a willingness to know that you're probably going to be poor. You're probably not going to ever make it wealthy in life, but you will create timeless works. It's a trade-off. And that trade-off isn't, write something tonight and make $1 million tomorrow. It's write something that's going to last forever, and you may have a decent life. You may not.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that, because a lot of the music I listen to is from, the 60s and 70s kind of era, and of the guys that didn't die from that era. Like, once they got into certain time periods, I can't listen to the music anymore. Maybe it's just because of the times change with the styles that everyone was playing, but that kind of does answer some of the thoughts in my head. It's just like, well, they're just keep going, and it's like, all right, well, how do I stay relevant? And well, I just kind of go turn poppy a little bit. There's very few guys that I listen to that I like. Frank Zappa is really one of the few guys that I can listen to his entire career of music, because he was someone that always was about the craft and always was about the music, always trying to. That guy was a stinking genius. And if anyone is an artist in more modern music, it's that guy. So that actually, it's funny that what you're saying is now making things, when you're talking about writing, it's making stuff I feel about music make all the more sense.
See what I'm saying? They're synonymous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really counterintuitive, especially as libertarians who love the market and everything, and think that making money's great, to say that, well, when you're making money with art, it can have the tendency to ruin it. But it's really kind of an interesting nuance that you bring up that I do agree with.
So what I don't necessarily think I'm trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is that
I didn't phrase that well.
Art shouldn't be monetized as a sole job. Art isn't a sole job.
Right.
It is a side thing. Yeah, you can make it big in life. Like, going back to Tennessee Williams, you can work a full-time job and then go back home and make a masterpiece that everyone can enjoy.
Right.
Like, it's just, art isn't necessary to society. It is adding an element to it. Therefore, it shouldn't be monetized as such. But it's very counterintuitive in many ways, because many things I feel about this is like, I really feel we should reward those who make the art of this generation, or make our time known through history. Like, you can't talk about ancient Greeks without, or the ancient, I can't remember if he was Greek. I think he was Greek. Yeah. You can't talk about ancient Greeks without Homer.
Mm-hmm.
He's part of the society. I think we should commend that, but I don't think we should allow them to leech off of hard workers that are providing necessary jobs for society.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think how I'm understanding it, or at least how I think, is when art becomes corporatized.
Yes. That's
where it gets like.
Yeah.
That's
when you have your record companies that are taking, your demo music was good, but we want to turn it into this. And then people selling out is, part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. But, it's a real thing. I mean, that's one of the things. My brothers also play music, and we've got a little band thing going. We're trying to get back up, and it's. We could
back together.
Yeah, we are. We just had a rehearsal Saturday night, and it's tough, because if you want to go out and get work and play at the bars and stuff, there's a certain kind of music you have to play, and we'll get jobs out there, but probably won't ask us to play at the same place again, unless we find like a really niche place that that's what they do, is they let us kind of just let them do their own thing, and those places are out there. But I know my dad was a musician too, but he did it part-time, and he always told us growing up, like, have it be a hobby, have it be a thing you can make money on the side with. And even him, I mean, he's retired and he's playing more music. Unfortunately, he just loves it, but he's taking jobs that I'd rather stick needles in my eyes than do. Like, he's around Christmas time, he plays a banjo and is an elf on a train. and he loves it. And good for him. But like, man, like that is not what I would want to do doing music.
It's tough. And talking about, I want to say this before I forget, but talking about art for the love of art, or music for the love of music more specifically, I listen to a lot of blues and bluegrass.
Mm-hmm.
The people that you hear, doing like bluegrass on like your popular streaming services and have records, that's not real bluegrass. Mm-hmm. That's not real blues. If you want to hear real blues and real bluegrass, you drive through the mountains in the South, or you go in one of those places, and you'll find it eventually. I think that is some of the best music I've ever heard. Is just a guy playing a banjo and three of his other neighbors on different instruments, and they're just singing about how they feel, rough days.
The washboard out.
Yeah, that is the same. That in my opinion, that's more of a fine art, if not is the same of a fine art, if not more of a fine art than going to a symphony. You know what I'm saying? That it's playing like Beethoven or something. They're doing the same thing in different ways, but one is out of love for the craft and expression of one's inner self, versus nowadays, Beethoven and Bach and Mozart. They're not here to hear what the audience thinks and to convey the messages that they want it to convey, but it still does. Because they were masters of their work, it still conveys the messages they wanted to convey. But they're not here to hear their audience. They're not here to add different layers of understanding. Whereas these guys, they're right there. You talk to them.
Yeah, like what would I don't know, I don't mean to pick on her, but no, I can't even think of her name. Taylor Swift. Like,
will you stop picking on Taylor?
Leave Taylor alone. Leave Britney alone. All right, let's use Britney. Leave Britney alone. It doesn't matter.
At one point, that's art.
Yeah, but like, Britney, I'm sure. Like, what's gonna happen? Another 50 years from now, is Britney Spears gonna be played? Like, her recordings might be played sometimes, but
who knows?
Is someone going to reproduce and do quote unquote cover Britney Spears? Like, is that going to be worth doing? Because it's not like the generation that's going to have listened to her is not going to be around anymore.
Right. Well, I got to throw this out there because I have an appreciation for all things trash. And so while I agree, I actually don't know what music today will be played. Like, you think of the Beatles in 1960s, it's over 50 years ago. People still listen to that. People still play it. They have a XM radio station.
Yep.
And pretty much everyone knows the Beatles, no matter how old you are. You've heard at least some of their songs. Do you think there's any bands like that today that will exist 50 years from now? I have no idea. Like, I don't listen to music from today, but where I'll give my little nod to the cap to the trashy stuff is there's something to it. When you can sell millions of albums, there's something there. It might be trash. It might not be deep. It might not have as much meaning to someone who, like yourself, who knows art and knows and looks for certain things. But to someone, I mean, really like myself, and I don't want to say I don't have an appreciation for art, because I can appreciate the talent. I just don't know much about it. I've never been in it. But there's a lot of catchy tunes out there that can be enjoyed to go out for a run and listen to some beats in the background or whatever the case is. I think there's a spot for it. However, I would not compare it to fine art. I put it in a different category as a totally different thing, and not really competing with each other in my mind, if that makes sense. Like Budweiser is, if you compare it to your most local, microbrews, doesn't even compare. But it's almost like a totally different product. Budweiser is great for when you need to buy 60 of them and you're having a tailgate and you're drinking 10 of them and you're passing them out to your buddies. Sure, we'll drink Budweiser. I think they're like totally different things. I don't think And even if you look at the ads for like trash beer like Bud Light, Miller Lite, they never really talk about the beer. They talk about the Vortex bottle or the screw cap, or they talk about the features of the bottle, which make it easier to pour, which is very interesting, I think. So just to give a little, I don't want to totally trash all our trashy stuff that I love, like my McDonald's food and Budweiser beer, because I do think they are separate categories. Do you disagree with that, Rollo or Shop?
I think you hit the head on the nail. That for me, that's the difference between entertainment and art.
Yes.
Like
okay,
I'm not
good,
gonna
yeah.
lie to you. I don't listen to like classical music on the way to work. I don't read epic poems every day of the week. I shit post on Twitter.
Right.
I mean, like
Wait, that's not art?
Yeah, 50 years from now, people will be reading old tweets.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great.
Well, it's like potty humor. I mean, I love it, and it's silly and it's goofy and it makes me laugh, but it's not like that's that joke that I made about, I don't know, taking a dump the other day is not going to stand the test of time. Yeah, it's
Listeners, let's help this. Let's help make that tweet stand the test of time.
yeah. No, but I agree with you. And again, and that's what you mentioned, Shop, early on. You don't want to make it sound like hoity-toity, but I think it is important to, categorize things. And it's almost, I'll even bring up cooking and food again. It's like, we're eating a lot of, yeah, I was just going to call it slop, but we're eating a lot of food that is not like,
It is slop.
Yeah, it's slop. And it's like, well, is it because we live in this society that doesn't value like, production and what it takes to, the processes that it takes to do stuff? Or is it just because we want the instant gratification, and so that's what we're getting, and we can appreciate McDonald's and
I thought you'd go back to money and talking about the inflation and how it's cheaper to eat slop.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting around to, is that it serves a need, satisfies a demand for what we have now, but it's because I think that we've got such a warped society because we, time preference has been so messed up by the lack of having sound money. And I know it sounds weird to say that. It's like, oh, money's the problem because because of fiat. And it's like, yeah.
Hey, Rollo, Bitcoin solves this.
It does. Bitcoin fixes this. Actually, I'm glad you said that, because before we started this episode, I wanted to say that line at one point in this episode. Like, hey, Bitcoin fixes this. But it's true. Just the kind of the lowering of the time preference, the ability to say like, hey, well, I don't know. I think that it has a lot. It will change the behavior and the desires of people if they're geared more towards a saving attitude and less towards I want instant gratification and I don't care. I'm willing to mortgage the future on it. Like, everyone our parents' age always says, well, they don't make the stuff like they used to. And it's like, well, yeah, because people don't want it anymore. They want the next flashy thing that's out there. And so the manufacturers are just responding to that.
That's what comes. Oh, go ahead.
No, you could. I was just going to ask a random ass question that had nothing to do with the conversation where we were.
That goes to innovation. I don't know how to phrase this. Is that when I write, let's say I write a short story, I write prose. I want to be able to convey my message to someone 300 years from now. Mm-hmm. So that person 300 years from now can know what I felt like today, September 9th, 2019. To know, so that he or she or it or whatever is down the road can know that someone has felt the way that they do in that very moment 300 years before.
Yeah, I think that's great.
That's exactly what Shakespeare's sonnets do.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was actually going to ask a question about Shakespeare earlier, because I never read much Shakespeare. I read Hamlet. Is that what it's called, Hamlet? The actual Hamlet. Title of it. I read that in high school because I was forced to and I didn't want to, but I did, and I still remember the story today. At least not all of it, but I know he was like chasing the ghost of his father his whole life and led to his own destruction. I think that's about right.
Mhm.
But I also read other books in high school and have no recollection whatsoever of it. So something about maybe the way he wrote it, or just maybe it's the story, but it stuck with me almost 20 years later. So there's got to be something to it.
You're making me smile, Slappy. This is I love talking about Shakespeare because everyone always talks about Shakespeare and they have no really I wouldn't say no idea what they're talking about. They just don't
I
understand.
have no idea what I'm talking
quite.
about. Trust me.
There's a reason Shakespeare has stood the test of time. There's a reason that everyone knows him, and that there's a reason everyone regards his work as the best. His plays, I'm not as familiar with his plays. I mean, I don't have. I'm probably half y'all's age, if that. So I haven't had the lifespan to read all that.
How old do you think I am?
How old do you think I am?
You said you're in college, so
I haven't been 22 yet.
I'm
well,
19.
I was gonna say 19.
Holy shit.
Y'all in your 30s, right?
I'm close to
Yeah,
double.
I'm 31.
I'll be
Okay,
36
we're
in a
getting there. We're
month.
getting there.
Yeah, I'll be 36 in a month.
But it's with the plays I'm not as familiar, but with his poetry I'm very, very intimate and familiar with. Is that he's just a master of the English language. It's the easiest way to put it. With his poems, his sonnet cycle. So here's a little literature class for you. Sonnets are by themselves an expression of a singular theme. And there's a thing that poets did, especially in Shakespeare time, called the sonnet cycle. Sonnet cycle is a collection of singular individual sonnets that come together to paint a larger single theme. And with Shakespeare, his work is not complete because he just, he never got to finish it. And the poems that we know today as Shakespeare poems were actually pirated copies of his work. So we don't know if they were finished. We don't know if those are all the sonnets. We don't even know if those could have been his rough drafts for all we know. And with sonnet cycles in a sonnet cycle there has to be a specific order to be able to convey the overall theme. And with the pirating of the poems, that's lost. And to this day, you have doctors and all these people that are just crazy about his work, and I respect them for that. But they're writing entire books on, I have found the true rotation of his cycle, the true order, and then they write a whole book on why they think so. And then the next year, someone publishes a similar book, but they flip two orders of the poems. But saying that is that they still have the individual message of each sonnet. Each theme is still there. And all we can do is speculate the overall theme. Much like Canterbury Tales, that's another incomplete work, still very good. But scholars have actually been able to speculate where he was going by studying his life. And his name is slipping me right now. Give me 1 second.
Chaucer.
Chaucer, yes.
Geoffrey Chaucer.
There we go. Chaucer. By studying Chaucer and his life and his other works, they're able to speculate an ending. But once again, we don't know. It's a great mystery for all of these Old English writers or early pre-modern English writers.
Now, is that because they died while writing, or just never finished, or we lost it, or
they died? Chaucer, okay. I believe, died in the Irish Revolution. Don't quote me on that. But he never got to finish his work.
Right.
And most of these authors never got to finish their work because they were so dedicated to making it perfect and mastering their craft before they published what their masterpiece would be, that they died before they could do it. Because the human lifespan is not long enough to properly convey the human experience.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a heavy line, but it's true. Well, that's like there is. I heard a little while ago. Apparently they found another Murray Rothbard manuscript.
Yeah.
That he didn't. They somehow figured out that he intentionally did not publish it, and people were like, "Well, let's publish it and let's read what he had to say." And it's like, well, maybe we should just respect him that he, for whatever reason, he said, I don't think I want the world to read this. Who knows what the reason is, but since it is an art, since it is like their extension of who they are, if they're saying, I don't want to release this, I think that's worth respecting. And to your point about Chaucer and Shakespeare with their incomplete stuff, let's respect that. We don't know, we can guess, but we need to always make sure it's understood that we're kind of hypothesizing. Yeah. Not no one's an authority on someone's emotion and intellect and just what's going on in their minds.
So here's my random question I was going to throw out there. What would you think of someone like Charles Dickens, who I guess wrote, I don't know if you call them serials, but wrote like once a month in a magazine to finish his book? Seems like more for a the popular audience. But we still read him today. Would you consider Charles Dickens to be high art?
I would, and the reason isn't because I don't necessarily believe Charles Dickens was making millions off of his monthly input into his newspaper, whatever it was. Can't remember what it was.
Yeah, whatever he wrote in, right?
But
is that how he wrote Great Expectations?
Yeah, it was like a chapter a month or whenever they put it, a quarter, whenever they put it out.
And also, that's when they put it out. It doesn't necessarily mean that he wrote it every month. Sure. There's a lot of factors to it, but also he was a fantastic writer. Yeah,
sure.
He may have pushed it out month by month, but how many years of experience did he have in writing before that?
Yeah, or he's just a virtuoso that.
Yeah. Something that makes me very jealous, but
Oh yeah. I've gone to concerts and like watch people play music and just go home and cry.
Wonder why they're just not as good as you.
Yeah, just go home and cry.
But I mean, when it comes to that, it's up in the air. I don't have any answers for you. I have speculations, but I can't say anything for sure.
Yeah, I guess there's no real line you can draw. It's real kind of blurry, and you just kind of jumping around with, like I was saying earlier, it's music, and there might have been some stuff that you could take an author and say, oh, this is fine art. This work is fine art. This work, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
I don't see why you have to, once someone's in this category, they are there forever.
There's a reason there's magnum opuses or magnum opus.
Yeah, opie. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Magni opie. Bird Arcus will correct us.
Hey, no,
I think it's Magnus Opus.
Bird. No. Bird is look. I grew up Catholic. Bird's a Catholic.
We're Catholic, both of us.
Okay. Catholic Latin is wrong. I'm sorry.
Yes, I know.
Ecclesiastical. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, ecclesiastical.
It's wrong. It's grammatically incorrect. It's pronounced wrong. But it's rudimentary, and I'll give Bird a pat on the back for that.
Yeah. Slappy and I had Father Devlin. Yeah, Father Devlin, and then Mr. Skronsky.
Does everyone in the
Skeeter
ANCAP community or libertarian community know a bit of Latin? Because that's
it's unbelievable. Weird. Like everyone must have gone. Every ANCAP must have gone to Catholic high school and had 2 years of Latin because it's
Agricola.
Yeah. Ubi Cygnus.
Yeah.
But
we have the Latin. Speaking of fine art, we have Father Devlin's Latin preposition rap.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ob, ex, de, pro, pre, cum, sine, and sometimes in super.
There you go.
Oh, that kind of brings me to another point I wanted to talk about. Weirdly enough, the evolution of language and how you can't really be wrong in language. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
grammar's there. Like, my favorite line that I learned in Latin is Kaiser non super grammaticus. Caesar's not above the grammarians. But I think one of the most fun things in writing and literature in general is loopholes in grammar. In Moby Dick, I think there's a 2-page long sentence, but it's grammatically correct.
Holy cow!
That's
Yes.
that's like every
That might be
every
considered run-on.
that's like
But
every
it's not.
that's like every epistle by St. Paul.
Yeah, it's it's fun to do that. It keeps literature exciting, especially for the writer, because grammar is like it's like laws that it's like grammar is the government and writers are the separatists and fugitives trying to get around it.
Well, that's I mean,
That's
just
kinda
reminded me.
interesting. Yeah.
I'm reading Daemoneda by Nicholas Erasme. It's like one of the first treatises on money. It was written in the 14th century, I think, and he wrote it in Latin. So they have like the Latin translation on the left page and the English translation on the right. And yeah, there are like page-long sentences but it's like, well, he wrote. I can't see anything that's wrong with it. You just kind of notice it sometimes, like, oh, that I haven't seen a period in a while. Probably means I'm not absorbing the book very well if I'm noticing counting periods as I'm reading. But no, it's funny how like someone who writes well can get away with that kind of stuff. And again, I guess it is an art.
And that's partly because that sprouts into, I believe, the evolution of language. I mean, I'm no expert in this field. You have a bunch of these linguists, and I don't know how I feel about linguists and people that study linguistics and all that, but
I have a cousin who's a linguist.
like, what kind of linguist? Like,
I have no idea.
okay.
He does some with computers now. I don't know. So maybe I don't know. He got like a doctor in it.
But when it comes down to evolution of language, I mean, if you look at Old English to, our modern English, arguably moving into some postmodern English, it's so similar, it's not even funny. Now, if you look at it from a untrained eye, it looks terrifying. Old English looks like Latin, but if you're able to read it and take, a second to really look at it, it's still English. That's what, people that study Old English, they don't call it translation, they call it transliteration, because you're not actually translating, you're just updating.
Yeah, just kind of recalibrating your mind. So.
Yeah, and what's also hilarious to me is that Old English grammar is more similar to a backcountry Southerners grammar than it is to
How about that?
Latin. They talk in very odd ways, but the evolution of the language, especially English language, it's come a long way from So a lot of the words, it's kind of funny, like words like knight that we know, the K and I, sword fighting knight.
Mm-hmm.
We have these weird spellings and weird rules from them. But that used to not be weird spelling and real weird rules, because knight with the sword and armor was actually pronounced knight. And same thing with knife, it was connive, and kind of it's just we've simplified over time. That's why I have a problem with a lot of, not necessarily a problem, I just get micro triggered about Canadians and English and British, and they just like refuse to evolve with time. I mean, it's more of a divergence than anything from American English from British English and all that. I completely lost my train of thought, but I think what I'm trying to say is that the evolution of language is pretty cool if you look into it. A lot of things are comical. Like, speaking of comedy and language evolution, if you didn't know, guy who wrote Monty Python, John Cleese,
Mm-hmm.
he has a master's in medieval English. That scene in Monty Python, The Holy Grail with the Frenchman, that was all based on correct early like pre-modern, like when they're saying knigget and that kind of thing. It's all pretty accurate.
Yeah.
But I do encourage people to look into the evolution of language. It's a very interesting topic, and how it just to look at it today and how it evolves with my generation and even younger generations. How the English language continues to simplify into words that don't make any sense to the older generations. I think that's really a natural human perspective on life, is just to simplify means of communication. And you can see that all over the world now with, smartphones and, from yeah. You try to see what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's not necessarily, obviously it's the words, but it's the shared experience of understanding what you've experienced a little bit is what makes it make sense. Because I know, I mean, I've been struggling to verbalize a lot of what I'm thinking, but I think that you guys are grasping what I'm saying. It's just because of that shared human experience, which kind of proves your thesis correct, that why art is so important, because it conveys things that we have such a hard time verbalizing. But you can look at a piece, you can listen to some music, read a story, look at a painting, and we can all get the same or similar feelings from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really, really powerful.
I mean, I could tell anyone I'm sad, but if I can point to a song or a painting or something that shows the type of sad that I feel right now, it's a whole different story.
Absolutely. So I don't know. Slappy, do you have any other questions or ideas or?
Just that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark.
There's something rotten in the state of Denmark.
Shakespeare quote to the uneducated. No, I got nothing.
All right. So do you have anything, Shop?
Yeah, where can people find you? Follow you on Twitter, or
do
you publish any of your writings or put them? Do you have a blog or anything?
I don't right now. In the future, I'll probably tweet out when I have something in the works for publication, but I write under a pseudonym of the Shop. So if you ever see any of that in bookstores,
buy it.
Steal it.
Nice. Yes. Because we don't want you making any money and ruining it.
I've already made my money if it's in the bookstore, so I don't care.
There you go.
True. Yeah. All right. So this is what I do to the guests all the time, because I always forget to bring it up. But
on the spot.
Yeah. Do you have a free market success story you'd like to share, Shop?
Three college kids seeing success in the free market.
It's tough. I live in a super like my college is one of the 5 senior military colleges in the country, so it's like statism to a T.
Wow. So that's interesting. So it's like a military is it one of the academies?
No.
Okay.
So there's
like Merchant Marine Academy type deal?
It's so there's the academies, but then there's 5 senior.
Okay.
I don't want to dox myself.
Yeah, sure. I won't. You don't have to go further.
But they have like huge ROTC programs.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, those are usually a lot of times people who are benefiting from the free market. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist.
Oh yeah. But free market. Jeez.
You don't have to have one. I have one in my back pocket.
Yeah. Right. Let's hear what you got.
If I get anything, I'll let you know.
Okay. So. I've been having issues listening to podcasts and stuff in my car. My car doesn't have Bluetooth, so I have to use the audio jack from my phone, the headphone jack. And I think I've messed it up enough that it's not working really well anymore. So I can't. It's been difficult trying to listen to podcasts and music in my car. And I thought, like, man, I don't want to have to buy a phone over this. But since it's not an Apple, I just said, well, let me see what I can get. Repair the headphone jack. And I found that you can buy a headphone jack for like $2 online and just pop a couple screws off and replace it. So that's what I'm going to do. And so, hey, instead of buying spend money on a phone, I can spend only a couple bucks and repair it and get it back back to as good as new.
Very good.
All right. I don't know if this is a free market success story, but
That'll not be a communist success story.
No.
Okay.
No commies, no tankies, no commies.
It'll be the first one.
I bought a bunch of silver not too long ago, and I broke even on it. Not like last week. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, just you were able to find it. Someone was willing to get it to you.
Yeah.
Good speculation on your part.
Cool.
So, yeah, again, show notes page will be mcflugel.com/161. We will have, in case you don't know how to spell his Twitter handle, that will be linked to on the show notes page, so be sure to follow him there. And if you have anything else that you think of at any point that you want us to throw up there, we'll throw a link. So,
All
right.
yeah, and you can hang on once we stop the recording. But thanks for listening, everyone. I thought that was a pretty good conversation. Really interesting stuff, and stuff that, since it's all relatable, things we could probably all talk about for a long time. So
yeah, I enjoyed the episode. And talking to Rallo earlier, I was like, I know nothing about the high arts. This was actually really fun. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're always welcome back on anytime. So thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Peace.